I was just a poor kid in a classroom full of people who didn't even know I existed. But that day, something happened that I never expected. What I did changed everything, and I still can't believe it happened. Before I continue, if stories like this inspire you, subscribe to the channel now so you don't miss the next ones. My name is Marcus. I was 12 years old, and I lived in the east side of Detroit with my mom in a tiny apartment that smelled like mildew and fried food from the neighbors. We didn't have much. Actually, we had nothing. My clothes were always too big or too small, hand-me-downs from cousins I barely knew, and my shoes had holes that let the rain in every time it poured. But my mom, she worked 2 jobs just to keep us going. She cleaned offices at night and worked at a laundromat during the day. I barely saw her, but when I did, she always had this tired smile that broke my heart. School was supposed to be my escape, but it wasn't. Jefferson Middle School was this old brick building with peeling paint and classrooms that were either freezing or boiling, depending on the season. Most kids there came from families like mine, struggling, barely making it, but there were a few who stood out. Kids whose parents had money, who wore new clothes and brought fancy lunches. And then there was me, sitting in the back, hoping nobody would notice I existed. Mrs. Patterson was our English teacher. She was in her 50s, gray hair pulled back in a bun, and she had this way of looking at you like she could see right through you. Some kids liked her, others didn't. I never knew what to think. She was strict but fair, or at least, that's what everyone said. I just kept my head down and did my work, trying not to draw attention. But there was this girl in our class. Her name was Keisha. She was quiet, like me, but for different reasons. Keisha was black, one of the few black students in that particular class, and she came from the projects on the other side of town. She always sat near the front, her notebooks covered in doodles and her handwriting so neat it looked printed. She never caused trouble, never spoke out of turn, just did her work and minded her business. Then there was Brandon Thompson. His dad owned a car dealership, and everyone knew it because Brandon made sure we knew. He wore designer sneakers, had the latest phone, and always had money for the vending machines. He wasn't the smartest kid in class, but he was loud, confident, and he had this group of friends who followed him around like he was some kind of celebrity. One Thursday afternoon in October, everything changed. We were in English class, and Mrs. Patterson had just handed back our essays on To Kill a Mockingbird. I remember because I'd actually tried really hard on mine, stayed up late writing it by the light of my phone because our electricity had been shut off for a few days. I got a B-, which felt like a victory. Brandon got his paper back and he wasn't happy. I could see it from where I sat. His face turned red and he crumpled the paper in his fist. Mrs. Patterson had given him a D. She'd written comments in red ink all over his essay, pointing out that he hadn't really understood the book, that his arguments didn't make sense. He raised his hand, but he didn't wait to be called on. Mrs. Patterson, this grade is unfair. She looked up from her desk, her glasses perched on her nose. Brandon, we can discuss it after class. No, I want to discuss it now. His voice was louder than it needed to be. I worked hard on this essay. Some kids turned around in their seats. I sank lower in mine, not wanting to be part of whatever was about to happen. Mrs. Patterson sighed. Brandon, your essay showed you didn't engage with the themes of the novel. Your analysis was superficial. That's not fair, he said, standing up now. Keisha got an A and I read her essay. It's not that good. The room went silent. Keisha, who had been quietly reading a book, looked up. Her expression didn't change, but I could see her shoulders tense. Mrs. Patterson's voice was firm. Brandon, sit down. Keisha earned her grade through thoughtful analysis and strong writing. But Brandon wasn't done. Come on, we all know why she got an A. You're just giving her special treatment because of, He didn't finish the sentence, but everyone understood what he meant. The air in the classroom changed. It felt heavy, suffocating. A few kids gasped. Others looked down at their desks. Keisha's face remained neutral, but I saw her hands grip the edge of her desk, her knuckles turning lighter. Mrs. Patterson stood up, her face pale. Brandon Thompson, that is completely inappropriate. Apologize to Keisha right now. Brandon crossed his arms. I'm just saying what everyone's thinking. No one is thinking that, Mrs. Patterson said, her voice shaking slightly. You're making a racist accusation, and it will not be tolerated in my classroom. I'm not racist, Brandon shot back. I'm just being honest. It's not fair that some people get advantages. I felt something twist in my chest. I looked at Keisha. She was staring straight ahead, her jaw clenched, and I could see the tears forming in her eyes even though she was fighting hard not to let them fall. Nobody was saying anything. Nobody was standing up for her. Not Mrs. Patterson, who was fumbling for the right words. Not any of the other students who were all too scared or too uncomfortable to speak. And then I thought about my mom. I thought about how she worked herself to exhaustion every single day, how she never complained, how she always told me to stand up for what was right even when it was hard. I thought about all the times people had looked at us like we were nothing, like we didn't matter because we were poor. My hand shot up before I even realized what I was doing. "Marcus?" Mrs. Patterson said, surprised. I stood up, my legs shaking, my heart pounding so hard I thought everyone could hear it. "That's not true," I said, and my voice came out quieter than I wanted. I cleared my throat and tried again. "That's not true, Brandon." Brandon turned to look at me, his eyebrows raised. "What are you talking about?" "Keisha's essay was good because she actually understood the book," I said, my voice getting stronger. "I read it too. She talked about how Scout learned to see people as individuals, not just stereotypes. She connected it to real life, to how people judge others without knowing them. Your essay, I saw it when Mrs. Patterson was handing them back. You just summarized the plot. You didn't analyze anything." Brandon's face turned even redder. "Who asked you, Marcus? You're nobody." "Maybe I am," I said, and I could feel my hands trembling. "But I know what's right and what's wrong. And what you just said to Keisha was wrong. She didn't get an A because of special treatment. She got it because she worked hard and wrote something meaningful. You're just mad because you didn't." The classroom was completely silent now. I could feel every pair of eyes on me. Mrs. Patterson looked shocked, her mouth slightly open. Keisha was staring at me, and I couldn't read her expression. Brandon laughed, but it sounded forced. "Whatever, man. You don't know what you're talking about." "I do," I said. And now I felt something else, something bigger than fear. I know what it's like when people look at you and decide who you are before you even open your mouth. I know what it's like to be judged for things you can't control. And I know that what you did just now, trying to tear someone down because you're angry about your own grade, that's the lowest thing you can do. Mrs. Patterson finally found her voice. "Marcus is right, Brandon. What you said was hurtful and completely unfounded. You owe Keisha an apology and you need to leave my classroom. I'm sending you to the principal's office." Brandon grabbed his backpack, his face twisted in anger. "This is ridiculous," he muttered, but he didn't say anything else. He walked out, slamming the door behind him. The room stayed quiet for a moment. Then Mrs. Patterson spoke, her voice softer now. "Thank you, Marcus. That took courage." I sat down, my legs feeling like jelly. I didn't feel brave. I felt terrified and exposed and like I wanted to disappear. But then I looked over at Keisha, and she was looking back at me. She didn't say anything, but she nodded, just once, and I saw the smallest hint of a smile on her face. After class, as everyone was packing up their things, Keisha walked over to my desk. Up close, I could see that her eyes were still a little red, but she looked calmer. "Thank you," she said quietly. "You didn't have to do that." "Yes, I did," I said, and I meant it. "Nobody should have to sit there and take that." She smiled, a real smile this time. "Still, most people wouldn't have said anything." I shrugged, not knowing what else to say. It was the right thing to do. She handed me a piece of paper. "This is my number. If you ever need help with homework or anything, let me know. I mean it." I took the paper, surprised. "Thanks." As she walked away, I realized something. I'd spent so long trying to be invisible, trying not to be noticed, that I'd forgotten what it felt like to actually stand for something. And yeah, I was scared. I didn't know what would happen next. If Brandon would try to get back at me, or if other kids would think I was some kind of troublemaker. But in that moment, I didn't care. Word spread fast. By the end of the day, everyone knew what had happened in Mrs. Patterson's class. Some kids gave me looks in the hallway. Some whispered when I walked past. I heard my name mentioned a few times, but I couldn't tell if it was good or bad. When I got home that afternoon, my mom was already at work, so the apartment was empty. I sat on our old couch, staring at the cracked ceiling, replaying the whole thing in my head. Part of me wished I'd just kept quiet, stayed invisible like always. But another part of me, the part that was growing stronger, knew I'd done the right thing. The next morning I walked into school expecting the worst. I thought maybe Brandon's friends would confront me, or that kids would avoid me, or that somehow I'd become a target. But instead, something different happened. As I walked down the hall toward my locker, a girl from my math class, someone I'd never really talked to, stopped me. "Hey Marcus, I heard what you did yesterday. That was really brave." I mumbled something that might have been thanks, feeling my face heat up. Then at lunch, when I was sitting alone like I usually did, 3 kids from my English class came over and asked if they could sit with me. One of them was a quiet kid named Daniel who I'd never heard speak in class. He looked at me and said, "What you did yesterday, man, that was real." I wish I'd had the guts to say something. I didn't know how to respond to that, so I just nodded and ate my sandwich. But inside, I felt something shifting. The biggest surprise came at the end of the day. I was called to the principal's office, and my first thought was that I was in trouble, that somehow I'd gotten blamed for the whole incident. My stomach was in knots as I walked down the hallway, past the trophy cases and the faded motivational posters. Principal Davis was a tall man with gray hair and a stern face that rarely smiled. When I walked into his office, he was sitting behind his desk, and Mrs. Patterson was there too, along with another teacher I didn't know well, Mr. Chen, who taught social studies. "Sit down, Marcus," Principal Davis said, gesturing to a chair. I sat, my hands gripping the armrests, waiting for whatever punishment was coming. But instead of punishment, Principal Davis said something I didn't expect. "Mrs. Patterson told me what happened yesterday in her classroom. She told me how you stood up for a fellow student when she was being treated unfairly." I glanced at Mrs. Patterson, who gave me an encouraging nod. "What you did," Principal Davis continued, "showed character and courage. In a situation where most students would have stayed silent, you spoke up. That's not easy, especially at your age." I didn't know what to say, so I just sat there, feeling awkward and confused. Mr. Chen leaned forward. "Marcus, we wanted you to know that we see you. We see the kind of person you are, and we think you have something special. We're not here to punish you," Mrs. Patterson added with a small smile. "We're here to recognize you. What you did was exactly what we try to teach in our lessons about empathy and standing up against injustice. You put those lessons into action." Principal Davis opened a drawer in his desk and pulled out a certificate. "This is our Student Character Award. We usually give it out at the end of the year, but we wanted to give it to you now. You earned it." He handed me the certificate and I stared at it, reading my name printed in bold letters. I'd never won anything before, never been recognized for anything. My throat felt tight, and I had to blink a few times to keep from crying. "Thank you," I managed to say, my voice barely above a whisper. "There's something else," Mr. Chen said. "We'd like you to speak at our next school assembly. We think your story could inspire other students to find their own courage." My eyes widened. "Speak? In front of everyone?" "You don't have to if you don't want to," Principal Davis said. "But we think it would mean a lot to the student body to hear from you, to understand why you did what you did." I thought about it for a moment. The idea of standing in front of the entire school terrified me. But then I thought about Keisha, about how she'd smiled at me after class, about how she'd given me her number and told me I didn't have to do what I did, but I had anyway. "Okay," I said. "I'll do it." Mrs. Patterson's face lit up. "That's wonderful, Marcus. We'll help you prepare." As I left the principal's office, clutching the certificate, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. I felt like maybe, just maybe, I mattered. That night when my mom came home from her shift at the laundromat, she looked exhausted as always. Her hair was tied back in a messy bun, and there were dark circles under her eyes. But when I showed her the certificate, her whole face changed. "Marcus," she whispered, taking the certificate in her hands and reading it over and over. "Baby, I'm so proud of you." She pulled me into a hug, and I felt her shoulders shake. When she pulled back, there were tears in her eyes. "You did what was right," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Even when it was hard, that's all I've ever wanted for you. To be brave and kind no matter what." I hugged her back, feeling my own eyes sting with tears. "I learned it from you, Mom." She laughed, wiping her eyes. "Well, then I must be doing something right." Over the next few days, things continued to change. More students started talking to me in the hallways. Some thanked me, others just wanted to hear the story firsthand. Keisha and I started eating lunch together sometimes, and I met her friends, other students who'd felt invisible or overlooked just like I had. But the biggest change was internal. I started to realize that being poor, wearing hand-me-down clothes, living in a tiny apartment, none of that defined who I was. What defined me was what I chose to do when it mattered. And that day in Mrs. Patterson's classroom, I'd chosen to stand up. Brandon came back to class a week later after his suspension. He didn't look at me, didn't say anything to Keisha. He just sat in his seat and kept his head down. I heard later that his parents had been called in, that he'd been required to write a formal apology to Keisha and attend some kind of diversity training. I didn't know if it would change him, but I hoped it would. The day of the assembly arrived faster than I expected. Mrs. Patterson and Mr. Chen had helped me write a short speech. Nothing too fancy, just my own words about why I'd spoken up and why I thought it mattered. Standing backstage in the auditorium, waiting for my turn to speak, I felt my hands shaking again. The auditorium was packed, hundreds of students filling the seats, their voices creating a dull roar that made my head spin. I'd never spoken in front of more than 30 people before, and now I was about to address the entire school. "You're going to do great," Keisha said from beside me. She'd offered to come backstage to support me, and I was grateful for her presence. "I'm terrified," I admitted. "That's okay," she said. "Being brave doesn't mean you're not scared, it means you do it anyway." Principal Davis walked up onto the stage, and the auditorium gradually quieted down. He spoke into the microphone, his voice echoing through the space. "Today we have a special presentation. One of our students recently showed extraordinary courage in standing up for what's right. Please welcome Marcus Johnson." The applause was polite but scattered as I walked onto the stage. The lights were bright and I couldn't see most of the faces in the crowd, which somehow made it both better and worse. I stood at the podium, gripping the edges to keep my hands from shaking, and looked down at my notes. Then I looked up and started to speak. My voice came out shaky at first, but I pushed through. "My name is Marcus Johnson, and I'm not special. I'm just a kid from the east side who wears secondhand clothes and sometimes goes to bed hungry. I'm the kind of kid most people don't notice, and for a long time, that's exactly what I wanted. To be invisible, to get through the day without anyone seeing me." I paused, taking a breath. The auditorium was completely silent now. But a couple weeks ago, something happened that made me realize being invisible isn't always the answer. I was in English class, and I watched a classmate get attacked. Not physically, but with words. Words that were meant to tear her down, to make her feel like she didn't deserve what she'd earned through hard work and talent. And I sat there like I always did, wanting to disappear. But then I thought about my mom. My voice cracked a little and I had to pause again. My mom works 2 jobs. She's tired all the time. We don't have much. But she always tells me to do what's right, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. So I stood up and I said something. And I was terrified. My hands were shaking, my heart was pounding, and I wanted to sit back down and pretend I hadn't said anything. I looked out at the sea of faces, and I could see some students leaning forward, actually listening. But here's what I learned. Courage isn't about not being scared. It's about being scared and doing it anyway. It's about seeing something wrong and refusing to let it slide, just because it's easier to stay quiet. We all have moments where we can choose to speak up or stay silent. And yeah, speaking up is scary. You don't know what people will think, what they'll say about you, if you'll make things worse. But staying silent, that has consequences too. When we let injustice happen right in front of us and we say nothing, we're part of the problem. I glanced at my notes, then decided to put them aside. These next words needed to come from my heart, not from a script. I'm standing here today because I got lucky. I spoke up and people listened. But there are kids in this school, kids in this auditorium right now who speak up every day in small ways and nobody notices. There are kids who fight battles we can't see, who show courage just by getting out of bed and coming to school. There are kids who are judged before they even open their mouths, who are told they're not good enough, who are made to feel invisible. I felt my throat tighten, but I kept going. To those kids, I want to say this. You matter. Your voice matters. And if nobody else will stand up for you, I will. Because we're all in this together. We're all just trying to make it through, and we need to have each other's backs. The applause started slowly, then built into something bigger. Students stood up one by one until the entire auditorium was on its feet. I stood there, overwhelmed, not knowing what to do with my hands or where to look. Mrs. Patterson was wiping her eyes from the side of the stage. Principal Davis was nodding with something that looked like pride. When I walked off the stage, Keisha was waiting for me. She didn't say anything, just hugged me tight, and I hugged her back. "You did it," she whispered. "We did it," I corrected. The days after the assembly were strange. More kids wanted to talk to me, to share their own stories of times they'd felt overlooked or judged. A sophomore named Maria told me about how she'd been mocked for her accent when she first moved from Mexico. A freshman named Tyler talked about being bullied for being overweight. A senior named Jasmine shared how she'd been told she wasn't college material because of where she came from. Each story broke my heart a little bit more, but also made me realize something important. We were all carrying these invisible wounds, these moments where someone had made us feel less than we were. And by sharing them, by acknowledging them, we were starting to heal. But not everyone was happy with what had happened. About 2 weeks after the assembly, I was walking home from school when I heard footsteps behind me. I turned around and saw Brandon and 2 of his friends, Jake and Connor, following me. My stomach dropped. I'd been expecting this, honestly, but that didn't make it any less scary. "Hey, Marcus," Brandon called out, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Big hero, huh?" I kept walking, trying to ignore them, but they caught up to me quickly. "You made me look like an idiot," Brandon said, stepping in front of me so I had to stop. "Got me suspended, turned everyone against me." "I didn't make you do anything," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "You did that yourself." Jake laughed. "Oh, listen to him. Think you're tough now?" "I don't think I'm tough," I said. "I just think I'm right." Brandon's face flushed red. "You're nobody, Marcus. You wear clothes from the thrift store, your mom cleans toilets, and you live in a dump. You think anyone actually cares about you?" The words stung, hitting exactly where he intended, but I'd heard worse, from my own thoughts. Late at night when I couldn't sleep and the weight of everything felt too heavy. "Maybe nobody cares," I said quietly. "But that doesn't make what you said to Keisha okay. And it doesn't make you any better than me just because you have money." Connor stepped forward, and for a moment I thought they were going to hit me. My body tensed, ready to run or defend myself, whichever came first. But then a voice called out from behind them. "Hey, what's going on here?" We all turned to see Mr. Chen walking toward us, his expression serious. He must have been leaving school late and saw us from the parking lot. Brandon and his friends immediately backed off, their tough demeanor evaporating. "Nothing, Mr. Chen," Brandon said quickly. "Just talking." Mr. Chen looked at me. "Marcus, you okay?" I nodded, not trusting my voice. "Brandon, Jake, Connor, I suggest you head home. Now." They didn't argue, just walked away, throwing glares over their shoulders. When they were gone, Mr. Chen turned to me. "Were they threatening you?" "Just words," I said, shrugging like it didn't matter even though my hands were still shaking. Mr. Chen studied me for a moment. "Words can hurt just as much as fists, sometimes more. If they bother you again, you come find me or any teacher immediately. Understood?" "Yes, sir." He walked me to the corner where I usually turned toward my apartment building, making sure I was safe before he left. As I climbed the stairs to our third-floor unit, I thought about what Brandon had said, about being nobody, about my mom, about where we lived, and I realized something. He was trying to make me feel small, because I'd made him feel small. But the difference was, I'd made him feel small by telling the truth. He was trying to make me feel small by attacking things I couldn't control. That night at dinner, which was just ramen noodles and whatever vegetables my mom could afford, I told her what had happened. She listened, her face growing more concerned with each word. "Baby, if those boys are threatening you, we need to tell the school," she said. "Mr. Chen already knows," I assured her. "And they're just mad. They'll get over it." She reached across our small table and took my hand. "Marcus, I need you to understand something. What you did, standing up like that, it was brave. But bravery sometimes comes with a cost. People don't always like it when you challenge them, when you hold up a mirror and make them see who they really are. Do you think I should have stayed quiet?" I asked. "No," she said firmly. "Never. I'm proud of you. So proud I could burst. But I also want you to be safe. Promise me you'll be careful." "I promise, Mom." She squeezed my hand. "Good, because you're all I have, and I can't lose you." The next few weeks were tense. Brandon and his friends kept their distance, but I could feel their eyes on me in the hallways, in the cafeteria, during gym class. It was like waiting for something to explode, not knowing when or how. But something else was happening too. More students were speaking up in class, sharing their opinions even when they disagreed with others. Mrs. Patterson started incorporating more discussions about social justice and empathy into our English lessons. Other teachers followed suit. It was like my one act of courage had created a ripple effect, giving others permission to find their own voices. Keisha and I became close friends. She introduced me to her world, to her family, to her church where the music was so powerful it made my chest vibrate. Her grandmother, a tiny woman with silver hair and a voice that commanded respect, told me I had an old soul. I didn't know what that meant, but the way she said it felt like a blessing. Through Keisha, I met other students who'd felt marginalized or overlooked. There was David, who had dyslexia and struggled with reading but was incredible at art. There was Aisha, who wore a hijab and dealt with ignorant questions and stares every day. There was Carlos, whose parents were undocumented and lived in constant fear of being separated. We started sitting together at lunch, this mismatched group of kids who didn't quite fit the usual social categories. We talked about everything, from homework to dreams to the injustices we saw around us. It felt like I'd found my people, the ones who understood what it was like to be underestimated. One afternoon in November, about a month after the assembly, Mrs. Patterson asked me to stay after class. I felt that familiar nervousness, wondering if I'd done something wrong. "Marcus, I wanted to talk to you about something," she said, sitting on the edge of her desk. "Have you ever thought about joining the debate team?" I almost laughed. "Me? Debate? Yes, you. You have a natural ability to articulate your thoughts, to make people listen. And after what happened in class and at the assembly, I think you have a perspective that would be valuable." "I don't know," I said hesitantly. "I'm not really a public speaking kind of person." "You spoke in front of the entire school," she reminded me with a small smile. "That's pretty public." That was different. That was something I cared about. And debate can be too. You get to argue for causes you believe in, to use your voice to advocate for change. Think about it. I promised I would, though I wasn't sure. The idea of competitive debate seemed so far removed from my world, from who I thought I was. But that night, lying in bed in our tiny apartment, listening to the sounds of the city through our thin walls, I thought about it seriously. What if I could use my voice for more than just one moment? What if I could learn to speak up not just when something was happening right in front of me, but about bigger issues, systemic problems? The next day, I found Mrs. Patterson and told her I wanted to try out for the debate team. Her face lit up. "Wonderful. Tryouts are next week. I'll give you some materials to prepare." The debate team met in room 204 after school on Tuesdays and Thursdays. When I showed up for tryouts, I was surprised to see about 20 other students there, including a few I recognized from my classes. The team captain was a senior named Michelle, a girl with sharp eyes and an even sharper wit. "All right, everyone," Michelle said, standing at the front of the room. "Tryouts are simple. We're going to give you a topic. You'll have 10 minutes to prepare, and then you'll present a 2-minute argument. We're looking for clear thinking, persuasive speaking, and the ability to handle pressure." The topic they gave us was whether schools should require uniforms. I'd never thought about it much before, but as I sat there preparing my notes, I realized I had opinions. I thought about how uniforms might level the playing field, how no one would be judged by their clothes anymore. But I also thought about how they might erase individuality, force everyone into the same mold. When it was my turn to speak, I stood up and made my case against uniforms, arguing that they were a superficial solution to deeper problems of inequality and judgment. I talked about how true change comes from teaching empathy and respect, not from making everyone look the same. When I finished, Michelle was nodding slowly. "That was good, Marcus. Really good. You connected a simple question to bigger ideas. That's exactly what we need." I made the team. Out of 20 students who tried out, only 5 were selected, and I was one of them. I couldn't believe it. Being on the debate team changed everything. I learned how to research, how to construct arguments, how to think critically about issues I'd never considered before. We debated healthcare, immigration, education reform, climate change. Each topic opened up new ways of seeing the world. But more than that, I learned how to channel my anger, my frustration, my experiences into something productive. Every time we debated inequality or injustice, I thought about my mom working 2 jobs, about Keisha being questioned in class, about all the students who felt invisible. And I used that fuel to make my arguments stronger, more passionate, more real. Our first tournament was in December, held at a fancy private school across town. When we pulled up in the school van, I felt incredibly out of place. The building looked like something from a movie, all modern glass and pristine landscaping. The students there wore blazers and ties, carried expensive laptops, spoke with confidence that came from never having to worry about money. I almost asked Mrs. Patterson if I could stay in the van, but then Keisha, who'd come along to support us even though she wasn't on the team, grabbed my arm. "You belong here just as much as they do. More, actually, because you have something real to say." The tournament was intense. I lost my first 2 rounds, stumbling over my words, getting flustered when my opponents made strong counter-arguments. But in my 3rd round, something clicked. I was debating healthcare policy, arguing for universal coverage, and I thought about all the times my mom had skipped going to the doctor because we couldn't afford it, all the times she'd worked through illness because she couldn't afford to take a day off. My voice grew stronger. My arguments became sharper. I didn't just cite statistics and studies, though I did that too. I connected the abstract concepts to real human experiences, to the people behind the numbers. I won that round, and the next one, and the one after that. By the end of the day, our team placed 3rd overall, and I was recognized as one of the top speakers. When Michelle handed me the small trophy, I felt something I'd never felt before: pride. Real, genuine pride in something I'd accomplished through my own effort and voice. If this story has moved you so far, hit the like button and subscribe to the channel, because there are other real and emotional stories you can't miss. The ride home was celebratory. Mrs. Patterson stopped at a pizza place, something I knew was coming out of her own pocket, and bought dinner for the whole team. As we sat around the table, laughing and rehashing our rounds, I felt like I was part of something bigger than myself. When I got home that night, trophy in hand, my mom was already asleep on the couch, still in her work uniform. I gently placed a blanket over her and put the trophy on our kitchen counter, where she'd see it when she woke up. The next morning, I heard her gasp from the kitchen. I came out of my room to find her holding the trophy, tears streaming down her face. "Marcus, baby, is this yours?" I nodded, suddenly feeling shy. "We got 3rd place at the tournament." She pulled me into a hug so tight I could barely breathe. "I'm so proud of you. So proud." "It's just a small trophy, Mom." She pulled back, holding my face in her hands. "It's not just a trophy. It's proof that you're becoming the man I always knew you could be. Strong, brave, smart. Don't you ever let anyone make you feel like you're less than you are." School became different after that. I wasn't invisible anymore, but not in a bad way. Teachers started calling on me more in class, trusting that I'd have something valuable to contribute. Students asked for my help with projects and presentations. I was becoming known as someone who had a voice, who wasn't afraid to use it. But with visibility came new challenges. Some students resented my newfound recognition. There were whispers that I was getting special treatment, that teachers liked me because I was the poor kid who'd stood up to Brandon. A few times I found mean notes in my locker, calling me a show-off, a teacher's pet, worse things I don't want to repeat. It hurt, but I was learning that you can't please everyone. Some people will always try to tear you down, especially when you're rising up from a place they think you should stay. The debate team continued to thrive. We competed in tournaments throughout the winter, and I kept improving. I learned to control my nerves, to think on my feet, to counter arguments I hadn't prepared for. Michelle took me under her wing, teaching me advanced techniques, helping me research more effectively. In January, something unexpected happened. A local news station reached out to our school, wanting to do a story about student activism and youth voices. Principal Davis immediately thought of me, of the assembly, of everything that had followed. I was terrified of being on camera, of having my story broadcast to thousands of people. But Mrs. Patterson and my mom both encouraged me to do it. "Your story might inspire someone else," my mom said. "Someone who feels invisible, who thinks they don't matter. You could show them they do." The interview took place in the school library. The reporter, a woman named Jessica Chen, was kind and put me at ease with her warm smile and gentle questions. She asked me about that day in English class, about what made me speak up, about how it had changed my life. I told her everything, about being poor, about feeling invisible, about watching injustice happen and deciding I couldn't stay silent, about how one moment of courage had led to unexpected opportunities, to friendships, to finding my voice. What would you say to other young people who are afraid to speak up? She asked at the end. I thought about it for a moment, wanting to get the words right. I'd say that fear is normal. It's okay to be scared, but don't let fear stop you from doing what's right. Because your voice matters, even if you think nobody's listening. Especially if you think nobody's listening. Someone is. Someone always is. And you never know whose life you might change, including your own. The segment aired 2 weeks later during the evening news. My mom and I watched it together on our old television, and I cringed at seeing myself on screen, at hearing my voice played back. But my mom cried, and when I looked at her, she whispered, "That's my son. That's my boy." The response was overwhelming. The school's phone rang off the hook with people wanting to share their own stories, to thank me, to tell me I'd inspired them. I got friend requests on social media from people I'd never met, messages from across the country. It was overwhelming and humbling at the same time. But the message that stuck with me most came from a girl named Emma who lived 3 states away. She wrote that she'd been bullied for years and had stopped going to school, but after seeing my story, she'd decided to go back and speak to a counselor. She thanked me for showing her that one person's voice could make a difference. I read that message over and over, and I realized something profound. My one act of courage hadn't just changed my life, it had rippled outward in ways I never could have predicted, touching people I'd never meet, in places I'd never been. But life has a way of keeping you humble. Just when I thought things were settling into a good rhythm, something happened that tested everything I'd learned. It was late February, and I was walking home from debate practice when I saw a commotion outside the convenience store on the corner. A crowd had gathered and I could hear raised voices. My first instinct was to keep walking, to mind my business like I'd done for most of my life. But then I heard a voice I recognized. My mom's voice. I pushed through the crowd and saw her standing near the entrance of the store, facing a man who was yelling at her. The store manager, Mr. Patel, stood between them, looking distressed. "I don't care what your excuse is," the man was shouting. He was middle-aged, wearing an expensive suit, his face red with anger. "You hit my car." "Sir, I already apologized," my mom said, her voice shaking. "It was an accident. I barely tapped your bumper while I was parking." "Barely tapped? There's a scratch. Do you know how much this car costs?" "More than you make in a year, I bet." I felt my blood boil. I pushed forward until I was standing next to my mom. "What's going on?" My mom's eyes widened when she saw me. "Marcus, it's okay, just go home." "No," I said, looking at the man. "What's the problem here?" The man sneered at me. "The problem is, your mother can't drive. She damaged my car, and now she's trying to act like it's no big deal." I looked at Mr. Patel. "Did you see what happened?" He nodded nervously. "I saw it through the window. It was a very minor bump, barely noticeable. I went outside to check, and there's only a tiny scratch, maybe 2 inches long." "A scratch is a scratch," the man insisted. "I want her insurance information now, or I'm calling the police." My mom fumbled in her purse, her hands shaking. I knew we had insurance, the bare minimum required by law, but I also knew that any claim would make our already high premiums even higher. "Here," she said, holding out her insurance card. The man snatched it from her hand and started taking pictures with his phone. "You people need to learn to be more careful. Can't afford decent cars, can't afford to fix the damage you cause." That phrase hung in the air. You people. I felt something snap inside me, but this time it wasn't fear or nervousness, it was clarity. "Sir," I said, keeping my voice calm even though my heart was racing. "My mom apologized. She gave you her insurance information. This was an accident. A minor one, according to Mr. Patel, who actually witnessed it. What more do you want?" "I want respect," he said. "I want people to take responsibility." "She is taking responsibility," I said. "But what you're doing right now isn't about the scratch on your car. You're being cruel because you can be, because you think we're beneath you." The crowd had grown larger, and people were watching intently. I felt my mom's hand on my arm, trying to pull me back, but I gently shook it off. "That's ridiculous," the man said, but his face had gone even redder. "Is it?" I asked. "Because from where I'm standing, you're humiliating my mom in public over a 2-inch scratch. You have her insurance information. You can file a claim. But instead, you're out here making a scene, calling us you people, talking about how much money you make. Why? What's the point except to make yourself feel big and make us feel small?" Someone in the crowd said. "He's right." Then another voice agreed. The man looked around, suddenly aware that the crowd's sympathy wasn't with him. I don't have to stand here and be lectured by some kid. You're right, you don't, I said. You can go file your insurance claim like a normal person and move on with your day. Or you can keep standing here proving my point. For a moment I thought he might explode. His jaw clenched, his fists balled at his sides. But then he seemed to deflate slightly. He looked at his phone, at the insurance information he'd photographed, then back at my mom and me. This isn't over, he muttered, but he turned and walked to his car. A gleaming BMW with the tiniest scratch on its back bumper that I could barely see from where I stood. As he drove away, the crowd began to disperse. Mr. Patel patted my shoulder. That was very brave, young man. Your mother is lucky to have you. When everyone had gone, my mom turned to me, and I expected her to be grateful, maybe proud, but instead her eyes were filled with tears, and not the good kind. Marcus, you can't do that, she said, her voice breaking. Do what, stand up for you? Put yourself at risk like that. That man could have hurt you. He could have called the police and made things worse. We can't afford trouble, baby. We just can't. I felt my throat tighten. Mom, he was humiliating you. I couldn't just stand there. I know, she said, pulling me into a hug. I know, and I love you for it. But Marcus, the world doesn't always reward people like us for speaking up. Sometimes it punishes us. I need you to be careful. I need you to be safe. We walked home in silence, and I thought about what she'd said. She was right, of course. The man in the suit could have made things much worse, but I also knew that staying silent, letting people treat us like we didn't matter, that had a cost too. That night lying in bed, I wondered if I'd crossed a line. If standing up for what was right was worth it when it might put my mom at risk, when it might make our already difficult life even harder. I didn't have an answer. The next day at school, I was quieter than usual. Keisha noticed immediately. What's wrong? She asked at lunch. I told her what had happened about the man and the car and my mom's reaction. She listened carefully, then said something that surprised me. Your mom's scared, Marcus. She's been fighting her whole life just to survive, and she's seen what happens when people like us make waves. But you know what? The fact that she's scared doesn't mean you were wrong. But what if something had happened to her because of me? Nothing happened, Keisha pointed out. You stood up, you spoke truth, and the guy backed down. Your mom's fear is valid, but so is your courage. They can both be true at the same time. Her words helped, but I still felt conflicted. I thought about all the times I'd spoken up since that day in Mrs. Patterson's class. Had I been reckless? Had I put myself and the people I loved at risk? That week we had another debate tournament. The topic was criminal justice reform, specifically whether the system treated wealthy and poor defendants differently. As I prepared my arguments, I couldn't help but think about the man with the BMW, about how different the interaction might have been if my mom had been the one with money, and he'd been the one who made the mistake. During the debate, I spoke with more passion than I ever had before. I talked about how the justice system, like so many systems, was built to protect those who already had power and punish those who didn't. I used facts and statistics, but I also used emotion, painting pictures of real people caught in an unfair system. We won that tournament. I was named top speaker overall, but the victory felt hollow somehow. Because what good was winning debates about justice if real justice seemed so far out of reach? What good was my voice if it couldn't actually change the systems that kept people like my mom and me struggling? I was wrestling with these questions when something unexpected happened. A man named Robert Chen reached out to the school. He was a lawyer who specialized in civil rights cases, and he'd seen my news interview. He wanted to meet with me. Principal Davis called me to his office, and when I walked in, Mr. Chen was sitting there. He was in his 40s, wearing a suit, but with kind eyes that reminded me of Mr. Patel from the convenience store. Marcus, he said, standing to shake my hand. I've heard a lot about you. We sat down, and he explained why he was there. I work for a nonprofit that provides free legal services to people who've experienced discrimination or civil rights violations. We're always looking for young people who understand these issues, who have lived experience with injustice. I'd like to offer you an internship this summer. I stared at him, not sure I'd heard correctly. An internship? But I'm only in 8th grade. I know, but you have something many people twice your age don't have. You have perspective, you have courage, and you have a voice that people listen to. We could use someone like you. Principal Davis was smiling. "This is an incredible opportunity, Marcus." "What would I do?" I asked. "You'd help us with research, attend client meetings when appropriate, learn about the legal system and how it can be used to fight for justice. And you'd get paid. Not much, but something. Paid." The word hit me hard. I could help my mom. I could actually contribute to our household, maybe take some of the burden off her shoulders. "I'd have to ask my mom," I said. "Of course. Here's my card. Have her call me and we'll discuss the details." That night, I showed my mom the card, explained the offer. She looked at it for a long time, then at me. "This is because of what you did, isn't it? Speaking up in class, the assembly, all of it." I nodded. She was quiet for a moment, and I could see her wrestling with something. Finally, she said, "I was wrong the other day. After the thing with the car, I told you to be careful, to not take risks. But Marcus, if you'd been careful, if you'd stayed quiet all those times, you wouldn't have this opportunity now. You wouldn't have become the person you are. But you were scared." I said. "I was. I am. I'll always be scared because you're my son, and I want you safe. But I'm also proud. So proud I don't have the words for it. And I think you should take this internship. I think you should keep using your voice, keep standing up, keep being brave. Just promise me you'll also be smart about it." "I promise, Mom." She hugged me, and I felt something shift between us. She wasn't just seeing me as her kid anymore. She was seeing me as someone who was becoming his own person, someone who had something important to offer the world. The internship started in June, right after school let out. 3 days a week, I took 2 buses to Mr. Chen's office downtown, a small suite in an old building that smelled like coffee and copy paper. The other interns were all college students, but they welcomed me without hesitation. I learned so much that summer. I learned about laws and legal precedents. I learned about the long history of civil rights struggles in America. I learned about the people who'd fought for justice before me, ordinary people who'd done extraordinary things simply by refusing to accept injustice. But most importantly, I learned that change is slow and hard and often frustrating. We worked on cases that took months, sometimes years, to resolve. We won some and lost others, but every case represented a real person, a real injustice, a real chance to make things a little bit better. One day in July, Mr. Chen asked me to sit in on a client meeting. The client was a woman named Mrs. Rodriguez, whose son had been wrongfully accused of a crime he didn't commit. She was in her 50s with gray hair and tired eyes that reminded me of my mom. As she told her story, crying as she described how the police had treated her son, how the system had failed him, I felt that familiar anger rising in my chest. But this time I also felt something else. Purpose. After the meeting, Mr. Chen and I talked about her case, about what legal strategies we might use, and then he said something I'll never forget. "Marcus, do you know why I do this work? Why I spend my days fighting battles that are often uphill, that pay a fraction of what I could make at a corporate firm?" I shook my head. "Because I believe that justice isn't just an abstract concept. It's something we build person by person, case by case, voice by voice. You standing up in your English class, that was justice. Me taking on Mrs. Rodriguez's case, that's justice. Every time someone refuses to stay silent in the face of wrong, that's justice. It's not always dramatic or heroic. Usually it's just ordinary people deciding that enough is enough." His words resonated deep in my soul. This was what I wanted to do with my life. Not just speak up in moments of crisis, but dedicate myself to the long, hard work of making the world more just. In August, near the end of my internship, Mr. Chen's firm won a major case. A group of workers who'd been discriminated against by their employer received a settlement and an agreement that the company would change its policies. It wasn't a complete victory. The workers had suffered for years, and no amount of money could undo that, but it was something. It was progress. The firm threw a small celebration, and they invited me. As I stood there surrounded by lawyers and activists and people who dedicated their lives to fighting for others, I felt like I'd found my place in the world. When I returned to school in September as a freshman, I wasn't the same kid who'd sat in the back of Mrs. Patterson's English class. I was someone who'd found his voice and learned how to use it. Someone who understood that courage wasn't about never being afraid, but about acting despite the fear. Someone who knew that one person really could make a difference, even if that person was just a poor kid from the East Side. The debate team welcomed me back, and this year I was no longer the nervous newcomer. I helped train the new members, sharing what I'd learned about research and argumentation. We competed in bigger tournaments against schools with more resources, and we held our own. Keisha and I remained close friends. She'd started a diversity club at school, a space where students could talk about their experiences and work toward making the school more inclusive. I joined, of course, and so did dozens of others. The club became one of the most active groups at Jefferson Middle School. Brandon graduated that year and went to a private high school. I heard he'd changed a bit, become less arrogant, though I couldn't confirm it. I hoped it was true. I hoped that our confrontation, as painful as it was, had taught him something about empathy and respect. Mrs. Patterson continued to be a mentor and friend. She told me later that my standing up that day had reminded her why she became a teacher in the first place, to help students find their voices, to create spaces where everyone felt valued, to teach not just English but humanity. My mom kept working her 2 jobs, but now I could help more with money from my internship savings. I'd started tutoring other students for extra cash, using my debate skills to help them prepare for presentations and essays. It wasn't much, but it eased the burden on her shoulders slightly. One evening in October, almost exactly a year after everything had started, my mom and I were sitting on our couch eating dinner and watching TV. During a commercial break, she turned to me. "Marcus, do you remember what I told you the night you got your character award? About being brave and kind?" "Yeah, I remember. I've been thinking about that a lot lately. About how I've spent so much of my life just trying to survive, just trying to keep us afloat. And somewhere along the way I forgot that surviving isn't the same as living. You reminded me of that. You showed me that even when life is hard, even when you don't have much, you can still stand for something. You can still matter." I felt tears prick my eyes. "Mom, you've always mattered. Everything I am, everything I've done, it's because of you. You taught me to care about what's right, even when you were exhausted. You showed me how to keep going even when everything feels impossible." She pulled me close and we sat there together, just the 2 of us in our tiny apartment that never felt big enough, but somehow always felt like home. The following week I was invited back to give another assembly speech. This time it wasn't about what had happened in Mrs. Patterson's class. It was about the journey since then, about how one moment of courage had opened up a whole world of possibilities. Standing on that stage, looking out at the faces of students who were just like I'd been a year ago, scared and uncertain and feeling invisible, I spoke from my heart. A year ago, I was terrified to speak up. I thought my voice didn't matter because of where I came from, because of what I didn't have. But I learned something important. Your voice doesn't matter because of your circumstances. It matters because you're human, because you have experiences and perspectives that no one else has. When you stay silent, the world misses out on what you have to offer. I paused, seeing some students nodding, others leaning forward. I'm not special. I'm not a hero. I'm just someone who decided that staying silent hurt more than speaking up. And yeah, it's been scary. There have been consequences, challenges, moments when I wondered if it was worth it. But then I think about the people I've met, the opportunities I've had, the changes I've seen in myself and in this school, and I know it was worth it. I looked directly at the audience, trying to make eye contact with as many students as possible. So here's what I want you to know. Whatever you're facing, whatever makes you feel small or invisible or like you don't matter, you're wrong. You do matter. Your voice matters. And the world needs it now more than ever. Don't wait for permission to speak up. Don't wait until you feel ready, because you'll never feel completely ready. Just start. Say something. Stand for something. And watch how everything begins to change. The applause was deafening, but more than that, I saw something in the eyes of the students watching me. Hope, recognition, the beginning of their own courage. After the assembly, a line of students waited to talk to me. Some wanted advice, others wanted to share their own stories. One girl, a 7th grader with braces and nervous energy, said something that stuck with me. "I've been scared to join the club I want to join because I don't think I'm good enough. But after hearing you, I think I'm going to try anyway." "You should," I told her. "The worst thing that can happen is you fail. But if you don't try, you've already failed." She smiled and walked away, and I hoped she'd remember that conversation when fear tried to hold her back. As months passed, I continued to grow and learn. The debate team made it to the state championships. where we placed second. I continued my internship with Mr. Chen's firm, now working year-round after school. I maintained my grades, helped my mom, stayed close to my friends. But more than any achievement or recognition, what mattered most was how I felt about myself. I no longer saw a poor kid in second-hand clothes when I looked in the mirror. I saw someone with value, someone with purpose, someone who mattered. That didn't mean life became easy. We still struggled financially. There were still nights when the electricity got shut off, still mornings when breakfast was just whatever we could scrape together. But those circumstances no longer defined me. They were part of my story, but they weren't the whole story. In the spring of my freshman year, I received news that changed everything again. Mr. Chen's firm had nominated me for a scholarship program that provided full tuition to a prestigious private high school. The program specifically sought students from underprivileged backgrounds who demonstrated leadership and commitment to social justice. I almost didn't apply. The idea of leaving Jefferson, leaving my friends, going to a school where I'd be surrounded by wealthy kids, it terrified me. But my mom insisted, "Marcus, this is your chance to get the education you deserve, to open even more doors. You can't let fear hold you back now." I applied, went through multiple rounds of interviews, and in April, I got the acceptance letter. I cried when I read it, not just because of what it meant for my future, but because of everything it represented. A poor kid from the East Side who'd once felt invisible was being given a chance that seemed impossible just a year ago. On my last day at Jefferson Middle School, Mrs. Patterson asked me to stop by her classroom. When I got there, she handed me an envelope. "Don't open it now," she said. "Read it when you need a reminder of how far you've come." I hugged her, trying to find words adequate to thank her for everything she'd done, but knowing there weren't any. That night I opened the envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter. "Marcus," it read, "the day you stood up in my classroom, you didn't just defend Keisha. You reminded all of us, teachers and students alike, what courage looks like. You showed us that age, circumstance, and status don't determine worth. That one voice, one moment, one act of bravery can ripple outward in ways we can't predict. You've inspired me to be a better teacher, to create spaces where more students can find their voices. Thank you for that gift. Never stop speaking up. The world needs voices like yours. With admiration and respect, Mrs. Patterson." I read it 3 times, then carefully folded it and put it in my desk drawer, where I knew I'd return to it whenever doubt crept in. If this story touched you, subscribe to the channel and comment below which part moved you most. And before you leave, there's a recommended video right here that will give you chills. Watch it now. Looking back on everything that happened, from that day in English class to this moment, I realized something important. Change doesn't always come from grand gestures or famous people. Sometimes it comes from ordinary people in ordinary moments, who decide that enough is enough, who stand up even when their voices shake, even when they're scared, even when it would be easier to stay silent. I was just a poor kid in a classroom, but I had a voice and I decided to use it, and that made all the difference. Have you ever judged someone and later discovered you were wrong? What lesson did you learn from this story?